You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Kanban brings clarity by making invisible work visible, limiting concurrent work in progress, managing flow, and enabling continuous improvement. At its core, Kanban is a simple promise. Show what you're doing, don't start more than you can finish, and watch how work moves so you can remove bottlenecks. It fits operational streams, support queues, maintenance, or run the business work, but it also suits project work where arrivals are irregular and priorities shift. The outcome of applying Kanban is smoother delivery with fewer surprise spikes, shorter and more predictable completion times, and better ability to prioritize urgent items without upsetting the whole system. Kanban can stand alone or be combined with sprinted approaches in Scrumban. Visualizing work and documenting your policies are foundational because they convert opinions into observable facts that teams can act on. A Kanban board's columns should reflect your actual workflow steps. Cards represent individual work items with clear entry and exit criteria. Explicit policies rules for when to pull an item in, how to treat blocked cards, and classes of service like expedite or fixed date prevent silent assumptions from derailing flow. Make blocked items and aging visible with color codes or swim lanes, and standardize definitions to reduce mystery work. When everyone follows the same policies and sees the same board, coordination happens with less conversation and fewer hidden surprises. Kanban reduces mystery work by making definitions explicit: what counts as in progress, what qualifies as ready, and what completion looks like for each column. Standardized definitions prevent people from starting work that isn't actually actionable, and reduce the blame game when something stalls. The board becomes both a work tracker and a policy document. When a card is pulled, the team knows exactly what entry criteria were met and what exit tests must pass. That shared language accelerates onboarding, reduces rework, and raises the quality of handoffs because expectations are agreed and visible before the work begins. 3 core flow metrics give teams plain English signals they can act on: work in progress, cycle time, and throughput plus lead time as the broader view. Work in progress, or WIP, is simply the count of items currently being worked on. Keep this number visible and limit it to what your team can actually finish without excessive multitasking. Cycle time is the elapsed time from when a team starts work on an item to when that item is finished. Say that slowly and clearly when explaining it. Throughput is the count of items completed in a chosen period. How many cards you finish per week, for example. Lead time spans from when a request is made to when it's delivered. Lead time includes waiting and is therefore usually longer than cycle time. WIP matters because too many items in flight force context switching and produce longer overall completion times. Quality suffers and predictability falls. Cycle time is your daily friend. It tells you how quickly a single work item moves from start to finish under current conditions. Throughput gives a course capacity signal, how many pieces of work you can reliably finish per interval. Lead time helps stakeholders understand the end-to-end wait they should expect when they make a request. Together, these simple metrics drive plain English decisions: reduce WIP to cut cycle time, stabilize throughput to improve forecasting, and communicate lead time ranges to customers. Visualize work with clear columns and simple card formats so anyone can read the board in seconds and see where attention is needed. Use explicit policies for entry and exit criteria and for pull rules, who may pull what and when. So the board reflects team agreements, not ad hoc behavior. Make blocked work stand out with a dedicated color and add an owner and expected unblocked date directly on the card, so blocking becomes an actionable signal rather than a whispered problem. Standardize card fields, assignee, due date, class of service, to reduce cognitive overhead and ensure that every card has the minimal context needed for the next person to act. Make aging visible by adding timestamps to key transitions, when a card entered a column or when it was unblocked, so you can detect items that linger longer than expected. A simple aging queue helps teams focus on the right problems. Older items often point to hidden dependencies or incomplete information. Use a simple notation rather than complex formulas. Teams act faster when the signal is obvious and the next step is clear: who will unblock and by when, rather than when they must interpret a dense report. Standardize definitions to reduce mystery work, where team members believe different things by habit. Define what ready means for the first column and what done looks like for the last column, including any verification or documentation needed. Making these rules explicit reduces the impulse to start partial or poorly specified work and lowers the time spent clarifying as the item flows through the board. Consistent definitions also make metrics meaningful because you measure the same thing repeatedly rather than a shifting set of hidden activities. WIP is the running count of items actively being worked on. State it slowly. WIP equals the number of cards between start and finish that are not yet complete. High WIP usually means people are multitasking, context switching, and slowing overall progress. Low WIP encourages focus and faster cycle times. Cycle time equals the elapsed time from when work actually starts on an item until it's complete. Say it slowly so listeners follow. Cycle time is start to finish. Lead time equals request to delivery. Lead time includes waiting time before work begins, and therefore is typically longer than cycle time. Throughput equals how many items finish in a chosen period items per week or month. Explain these metrics in round examples so decisions are intuitive. If your WIP is 10 items and throughput is 2 items per week, expect cycle times to be high. Reducing WIP to 5 while maintaining throughput will usually shorten cycle time. If lead time from request to delivery is 4 weeks but stakeholders expect 2, that mismatch demands process or priority changes. Use round numbers items per week, days to complete, to make forecasts, and to communicate probabilities rather than precise, fragile dates. Throughput is easiest to use for simple forecasts. Count completed items over recent intervals, and report a short-range range rather than a single date. Cycle time distributions show how variable completion is. If cycle time varies widely, forecast ranges must be wider. But avoid heavy statistics. Use medians and simple ranges that are easy to explain. Median cycle time is 5 days, 80% complete within 10 days. These plain English summaries let stakeholders act without needing deep statistical fluency. Manage flow proactively by limiting WIP and pulling only when capacity exists, rather than pushing work into the system. WIP limits force prioritization and expose bottlenecks. When a column hits its limit, the team must finish existing work or explicitly re-evaluate priorities rather than starting new items. Identify bottlenecks by watching aging and queue length-long queues or many aging cards in a column. Point to a constrained step that needs attention. Smooth arrival by staggering work intake or implementing explicit intake windows to avoid sudden load spikes. Reserve capacity for expedite work so critical items do not derail predictable flow. Explicitly define what qualifies as expedite and how it interacts with WIP limits so everything is urgent does not become the norm. Use visual signals to trigger action-colored cards, blockers, or swim lane flags to make it clear when intervention is needed. These visual triggers keep the team focused on flow health rather than on heroic last-minute firefighting that obscures systemic problems. When bottlenecks occur, apply simple tactics. Swarm the bottleneck with help, split large items into smaller pieces, or improve the bottleneck step's capacity through automation or clarified policies. Don't assume the fix is more people. Often clarifying entry criteria or reducing batch sizes eliminates the queue. Address chronic bottlenecks by adjusting team structure or by changing the policy that created the bottleneck in the first place. Sometimes the solution is organizational, not technical. Classes of service let you treat different kinds of work according to agreed rules, so the board reflects reality rather than wishful thinking. Common classes include standard work for normal items, fixed date for deliveries that must meet a calendar constraint, expedite for urgent production work, and intangible work for technical debt or maintenance tasks. Set explicit policies and limits for each class so stakeholders know what to expect. For example, only 2 expedite items can be active at once to prevent regular work from grinding to a halt. Avoid everything expedite by enforcing class limits and reviewing outcomes. If too many items are expedited, examine the root cause. Are handoffs broken? Are priorities unclear? Or is the intake policy too loose? Review class outcomes periodically and adjust policies based on observed data. If fixed date requests routinely miss dates, renegotiate expectations, or add capacity for that class. Communicate service expectations clearly to stakeholders so they understand the trade-offs. Faster handling of one class reduces capacity for others. Use classes of service to communicate stakeholder expectations plainly. A fixed date item will be prioritized differently from a standard card, and an expedite will consume reserved capacity. When stakeholders understand these rules, they can make informed trade-offs rather than defaulting to urgency. Review and refine the classes as delivery patterns change, so the system remains aligned with business needs and doesn't ossify into bureaucratic rules. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Little's Law is easiest to use when spoken plainly. In a steady system, the average amount of work you have in progress tends to equal how many items you finish per unit of time multiplied by how long each item takes on average. Say it slowly. If you finish 2 items per week and each item takes 3 weeks to flow through, you will typically see about 6 items in progress. Use this relationship as intuition rather than a precise calculator. It helps explain why high WIP with flat throughput produces long cycle times and points you toward the lever of reducing WIP first. Apply that intuition as a simple diagnostic. If you observe that the number of items in progress is growing, while the count of items finished per week remains unchanged, expect single-item completion times to lengthen. In plain terms, more things in flight means each thing waits longer. The practical rule follows. When throughput stalls and WIP rises, trim WIP or increase throughput capability at the constrained step. Speak assumptions allowed time window, how you counted items, so stakeholders understand the back-of-envelope nature of the reasoning. Use Little's Law to size interventions, not to promise exact dates. You can say, given our recent throughput of 3 items per week and target cycle time of 2 weeks, we should keep WIP near 6 to hit that cadence. And if WIP drifts higher, take visible action. Emphasize ranges. Aim for order of magnitude guidance and quick corrective steps rather than exact forecasts that crumble under variability. That makes decisions faster and less defensively statistical. Variability is the fuel of queues. When work sizes, priorities, or arrival patterns vary a lot, steps queue up and bottlenecks emerge. In practice, protect the identified bottleneck by reducing variability, feeding into its split large items, avoid batching, and make readiness criteria explicit so only work that can proceed enters the constrained step. This protects flow health by smoothing what arrives at the bottleneck and giving the constrained resource consistent, actionable work rather than unpredictable spikes that cause long queues. Bottlenecks are easiest to spot with simple visuals. Watch which column's queue keeps growing, which cards age the longest, and where throughput temporarily stalls. Act quickly with practical tactics. Swarm the constraint with extra focus. Remove unnecessary work feeding it, or change the policy that created the queue. Sometimes the fix is clarifying acceptance criteria rather than more hands. Treat these actions as experiments. Try a change, Measure whether queue length shrinks and either adopt or revert based on simple evidence. Address chronic bottlenecks with a mix of policy and capability changes. If a column is constantly overloaded because of required approvals, consider removing or automating steps, delegating authority, or adjusting the definition of ready so fewer items hit the bottleneck unprepared. If capability is the issue, invest in training, pairing, or dedicated capacity for that class of work. The right solution matches whether the root cause is process, policy, or skill, not a reflex to add bodies. Forecasting without pretending to see the future rests on recent throughput and consistent item sizing. Count completed items across recent windows, average the throughput, and report a delivery range rather than a single date. Keep backlog items similar in size to make throughput meaningful. Many tiny items mixed with one enormous one will skew forecasts and reduce trust. Speak forecasts as probability windows. Based on the last 4 weeks, we expect to deliver between 3 and 5 items next week with medium confidence, which is honest and usable. Use simple visual tools, throughput bars, median cycle time, and a range forecast to communicate delivery expectations. Don't overpromise. Present a short rationale describing the window and the assumption that item sizes remain similar. As throughput stabilizes, tighten ranges. Always qualify forecasts with the key caveat: if arrival rates or item sizes change, the forecast must be revisited. This keeps stakeholders aligned with the model's limitations and avoids blaming the team for normal variability. Refine forecasts incrementally. When new data arrives, update the short-range window and communicate the change with a one-line explanation. Avoid complex probability cones or heavy statistical language. Instead, show a simple chart of recent throughput with a proposed range and let stakeholders ask clarifying questions. This plain English approach preserves credibility while giving leaders the information they need to plan with contingency. The best next action is pragmatic and visible. Immediately set and enforce tighter WIP limits to stabilize flow. Focus on unblocking the bottleneck column by swarming or clarifying entry criteria, and present a short-range forecast based on recent throughput rather than a single date. Explain that tightening WIP will likely reduce cycle time within 1 to 2 weeks, and quantify the expected range using recent completion counts. Communicate the policy change to stakeholders. Explain the rationale in plain terms, and show how you will monitor, affect, and update the forecast. Follow that immediate step with short experiments. Split the largest items into smaller slices. Assign explicit owners to unblock aged cards, and reserve a small, documented expedite slot for genuinely urgent work. After a week of tighter WIP and targeted unblock actions, revisit cycle time metrics and report back with updated ranges. This sequence shows both decisive action and evidence-based recovery, rather than waiving deadlines or adding more work that would worsen the situation. Pitfalls start with letting WIP grow unchecked, which fuels multitasking and unpredictable delays that erode trust. Hidden queues work, waiting in people's inboxes or undocumented handoffs. Create blind spots that make flow metrics meaningless. Another trap is treating every request as an expedite, which collapses class differentiation and kills predictability. Finally, vanity charts that count activity but not flow mislead stakeholders into believing throughput is healthy when cycle time tells a different story. A compact playbook focuses on simple discipline. Visualize the workflow clearly, define and publish policies, set WIP limits, and respect them. Monitor the 3 core flow metrics, and act on visible bottlenecks with small experiments. Communicate change in plain English. Explain what you changed, why, what you expect to happen, and how you will measure it. Iterate quickly. Small adjustments and short learning cycles yield steady improvements in predictability and stakeholder confidence. Keep decisions plain and people first. When you reduce WIP, you ask people to focus, not to do less important work. When you change policies, explain how the change protects predictability and reduces frantic firefighting. Use the board as the conversation starter rather than a report to hide behind, and make the next action obvious for anyone who reads it. That practical discipline turns flow metrics into useful levers you can apply every week to improve delivery, reduce stress, and keep commitments credible. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.